Welcome home to St. Anne's. We want you to know that you're welcome to join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons. We can't wait to meet you. I feel like I don't even have that much time to preach. So we used it all reading the gospel. I guess that's appropriate, however, isn't it? I think God should get to talk more than I do. All right, well, let's talk about it. So we have been doing, you guys know I despise sermon series, but we've been doing a sermon series. We've been doing a sermon series based on the questions that you guys had that you were afraid to, ask, except you guys aren't terribly afraid to ask me anything, but we did it anyway. So last week, we talked about a couple of your questions, and this week I'm going to do more of a theme, I think, because there were a lot of questions that really had to do with the nature of God. So let's, yeah, big sigh, indeed. Let me just preface this with theologians have been arguing and killing each other about this for ever. So if you think I'm going to settle the score today, people way more brilliant than I have yet to figure out the nature of God. But we're going to talk about it because I think it really fits with our gospel today. And as you guys know, one of the reasons I despise sermon series is because I feel like they lock you into that and don't open up kind of all the different things going on in our lives that we might need to preach about that Sunday. So I've been trying to kind of carry those both at the same time of being a gospel preacher, which you guys know that I am, with also. We have a lot of questions that don't necessarily get answered all the time, right? Many people in this church have been going to church forever, and yet we still have really big questions that we feel like we can't get answered. So today we're going to talk about the nature of God. Because in many ways, that's what this gospel is really about. It's these folks trying to understand this God, right? And there's so many messages about the divine, right? We have angry God. We have nice God. We have absent God. We're not really sure what God is. And for many of us in kind of our culture at this time, it's that kind of absent God, okay, I might go to church, maybe, but really more because, that's the community that I hang out in, and that's kind of expected of me. And yet a lot of people really aren't absolutely certain about this God. If God is even there, or what the relationship with God is, and all those things. In fact, I was having a conversation just this morning with our senior warden about Christianity kind of losing spirituality, right? Because we sometimes are so focused on being justice-oriented or making disciples or whatever it is that sometimes we miss that personal relationship with God, right? And that spirituality, faith piece. And I get that. As a priest, a lot of my time is spent trying to get us to be good Christians, right? A lot of time that I'm talking to you guys, I'm like, we gotta be good humans, all right? Let's be good humans. Let's help other people be good humans. And sometimes we don't spend enough time with that relationship with God. Who is God? What is God? What is our relationship with that divine character? So let's talk about that, because the Pharisees are trying to figure it out. The man who's born blind is trying to figure it out, and everyone around them is watching them try to figure it out. And sometimes when we talk about figuring out the nature of God, we talk about, you get these tiny little glimpses, and sometimes the glimpse that you get is what God isn't. And sometimes you get the glimpse of what God is. And you really have to take all those different facets to kind of figure out who you think God is. And let me preface this with, it's going to be very unique to you, all right? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experiences and my views of the divine, but they might be a little bit different than yours. And that's a good thing, okay? If God created all these different humans, don't you think that God might find different ways to communicate with them? that might be appropriate to those people? I mean, I'm going to go with yes. So that's the short answer. Yes. So how God interacts with you in your experience of the divine are probably going to be different than mine. And they're certainly going to be different than somebody from 1,000 years ago, or somebody on the other side of the world, or somebody who has a different experience than you. Okay? So what our experience is not a universal experience. And we have a tendency as humans to universalize our experience, to think that this is my experience, so therefore it's the same as everybody else's. And it's really tempting to do that with God, but it is not universalized. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on in this story. So at that time, and in fact it's a common belief even now, that if you are a bad, sinful person, God will punish you and even potentially punish your children and generations after you, right? When we talk about God, the smiter, God smite me, you mighty smiter, it's this idea that God gets angry and God will punish you. God will punish your livestock. God will punish your children. God will punish your grandchildren forever and ever and ever, because you really messed up and God's angry at you. So this is a common belief. In fact, you've heard it even now. Like, you want me to say, oh, well, at this time in this scripture, that's what these people believe. But can I tell you a story? Because I'm gonna give you some of my stories in helping you in helping me explain how I kind of seen this. Okay, so when I got diagnosed with MS, a very interesting person said to me, well, you're being punished for your church doing so well. So yeah, because my first church, God bless them, I love my first church, and I just love churches, okay, I just do. And so they had spent the vast majority of their history for like the last 80 years killing priests and killing themselves. That's what they did. They were a priest killer, and then they ate themselves too. I know, really not a good model for church, but it is what it is. And so when I got there, we really started doing some hard work, and they started making progress. And so I was told that I was being punished. Like, that's why I have MS. God's mad at you. And in fact, when I was first diagnosed, so I was diagnosed, some of you know this, some of you don't know, I was diagnosed my last semester of seminary, Good Friday. Yeah, I detest Good Friday for many reasons, but do you have your hand up or no? Okay, I do this to my students all the time. I'm like, hand up or stretching? So, no, sorry guys. So when I was diagnosed, the priest of the church that I was serving at the time came and he was kind of being pastoral or whatever, and you do things you don't want to have to do as a priest. Have a seminarian who's going through a traumatic diagnosis. Like, it's awful, because this poor man was already trying to train me to be a priest, and now he has to like go through this. So he's trying to be pastoral, and he says, are you angry? Like, what is this doing to your faith? Like, how do you feel about all of this? Are you angry? And I said, no, not really. Because of my belief of the nature of God. And so that was one of the questions that you guys asked, was that nature of God question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God allow these things to happen? And that is kind of the ultimate Christian question, right? When we're all trying to wrestle with faith and religion, really one of our big questions about the divine is, so we say that God is love, and God is all these things, and yet these awful things happen in our world, and to good people, right? Why? What is the meaning of that? And we can feel angry, and that's valid, okay? So before we even go further into this, I want you to know anger at God is okay. Whatever emotion you're feeling towards God, God can handle it. And sometimes there's this fear that, like, if I get mad or I talk bad to God or I do any of these things, God's going to get mad. And how dare I do that? And we, like, walk on eggshells for God. God is God. And if you think that you are capable of hurting God's feelings, Christianity might not be for you. Okay? We work really, really hard to take care of God. God doesn't need us to take care of God. God got this, okay? If you're angry, be angry. If you're hurt, be hurt. If you're feeling joy, feel it. You don't need to protect God from God's self, okay? We are tiny little minutia creatures. We are not responsible for God's feelings. And God knows that. And the power of Scripture is the Psalms are all these conversations with God. Scripture is all these conversations with God. And all of those feelings are okay. Sometimes you rail at God. And sometimes you feel really sad and hurt and betrayed by God. And sometimes you feel really happy and joyful. You're like, woo, I've been blessed. We'll get into whether or not God blesses or God damns, but we'll get there in a second. Of course I would choose to do these questions on like a day with a long gospel. Sorry. You guys got plans for brunch. All right. So here's the deal. God does not do things to you. Okay? God does not do things to us. And Scripture and a study of Christian faith in all of history will show you that God is not a puppet master. Now, if you think God does predestine everything and God does things to you, then the Protestant faith has the Presbyterian Church, and I strongly recommend it. They're lovely. They're lovely people. They got great stuff. But that is not our tradition. Okay? Our tradition does not believe in predestination or God doing things to you, either good or bad. In fact, you will never hear me say, God has blessed me with all these things, because God doesn't do that. I do not believe God blesses nor damns. But here's the thing. God can and does use all things to the glory of God. Can I use an example? I'll use my diagnosis. Okay? Many of you know I was diagnosed with MS 14 years ago. 14 on Good Friday. Woo, Good Friday. You don't want to be around me on Good Friday. Like, I recommend you don't go to our Good Friday service at 7 p.m. on Good Friday, because I don't like Good Friday. Anyway, or come, and you can rail at God too. Okay, so do I believe that God gave MS to me? No, I don't. MS is caused by, and they're still doing studies on it, but it's a series of different genes that if they get turned on in the right order and you do the right things, you turn on an autoimmune disease. There's lots of research in autoimmune diseases and why there are so many of them, but really, autoimmune really comes down to this. You somehow made your body really, really angry, and your immune system starts trying to kill itself. It's that simple. That's what it is. And whatever your immune system chooses to target really determines what autoimmune disease you have. Mine just happens to like to attack my nervous system. That's what mine chose. But you can have situations like celiac disease where it goes in that direction. There are all sorts of different autoimmune diseases, right? If you have some different skin problems, those are frequently autoimmune, and that's just how autoimmunity shows up for you. So do I think God got mad at me for whatever reason? No. I mean, God has plenty of reasons to get mad at me. I just don't think God has the time to be that worried about my reasons. However, when I think about the nature of God, it is very much this. And it's in the Bible, because remember, I'm a Bible-based church, okay? If anyone tells you that we're not Bible-based, be like, we read the entire Bible in 3 years. How are you doing with that? The Lutherans, the Methodists, the real Methodists, Roman Catholics, us, we read the Bible in 3 years. Okay, so if you're part of the mainline denominations, you're a Bible-based church. Sorry, I had to get that in there. God is love. That's it. It's that simple. God is love. If it's not love, it's not God. Because God is strictly that, love. Whatever experience you have of love, whatever glimpse you get of love is a tiny little glimpse of the divine. And all the different ways that shows up in our world, that's what God is. It's that simple. So when I think about my diagnosis, has MS taught me to love? Absolutely. It has. Because remember, I was called to the priesthood at 16. I was ordained when I was 24. I've been doing this a long time. But that is young. I don't know how much you guys know about Episcopal clergy, but generally we're really old. Yeah, and it's because roughly in the 80s and 90s, the Episcopal Church went through this phase where they said, you need life experience to be ordained. So this entire group of clergy who probably would have been ordained early and committed their entire life to this went out and got paying jobs. Yeah, they went into law, they went into medicine, they went into teaching, they went into all these things that actually pay them. And believe it or not, God bless them, they stayed. Yeah. So every once in a while, somebody's like, well, I had a calling when I was younger, and now that I'm retired and I got time, now I'm going to go to the priesthood. So we're all old. Okay? We're just old. So it was kind of weird that I was a weird platypus in seminary. It was kind of weird that I was there. And I will tell you that my ending up with MS made me a better priest. It really did. Because, I don't know, do you guys believe in, what's it called? Myers-Briggs. Have you guys ever heard of Myers-Briggs? It's like a personality type. Okay. So you who know what Myers-Briggs are, I will tell you I was an ENTJ. Okay, what that will tell you is I'm extremely outgoing, but very, very, I was rigid, right? I was very black and white, very rigid. Not a lot of emotion for me. I was there a boom, we're getting it done kind of person. MS and ENTJs don't go together, right? Because that's just not how I can live my life. And when I learned that, for me, I learned it for other people. And I became a much more laid-back person, a much more compassionate person, a much more patient person. And that, I think, has made me a more loving person. So do I think God was in my diagnosis? Yes. Do I think God gave MS to me? No. Do you see how there's a distinction there? Okay, so do you see in our story there's a distinction of this guy is born blind. And Jesus makes it clear, no, he was not born blind because his parents are sinners and God was punishing. God can, however, use this story. God can use this man's experiences and healing and be proclaimed in that. Does that make sense? Okay, so when I get asked the question, why does God do bad things to good people? God doesn't. We don't believe that. We believe in choice. We believe in science. We believe in things happen, and they just do. Things just happen. However, in that space, is God present? Yes. And we'll learn a little bit about that next week along. Oh my gosh, I could segue right here into next week's sermon. You better come next week. When we talk about Lazarus, because that is when we really will see God act, or Jesus act within this moment of something awful and traumatic and tragic happens, and God can use that. So I'm not sure that really answers the nature of God and the divine, but I hope it opens it up to you a little bit to explore it a little bit differently. So when you reflect on your life, because you've had your experiences with the divine, otherwise you would be doing something different on a Sunday morning. God bless you. You guys know I always say New York Times this thick on a Sunday morning. You have a million other things that you could be doing. But God has clearly acted in your life. Or in enough of a way that you're really curious and trying to learn more. Or your parents made you go when you were young and now it's just a habit. But we don't really see that anymore because boomers never came back. The boomers, their parents made them go to church and they never came back. That's how awesome the Episcopal Church was in the 50s, in the 70s. But I hope this Lent that you can safely break this open, knowing you're not going to make God mad, okay? It's okay. God can handle this. If God could choose David to be the king, y'all know some stories about David? You've been in the church long enough for me to talk to you about David. If God can use David, and God can use Moses, y'all heard me tell some stories about Moses, right? And God can use Paul. Y'all heard me telling you some stories about Paul. Do you think God can handle you? Okay? Whatever you've done, it doesn't come close to David. Bad, the ugly, the indifferent, all of it can be used. So when you're exploring your experiences of the divine and what you think God, who you think God is, look at those tiny glimpses. What are those tiny glimpses? Those little pinpoints of light. All those pinpoints of light, when you put them together, will help you get a picture of who God is. And then, on Easter morning, you'll be ready. Oh, also, when you think, I love this question. Well, why is there poverty and why is it? Don't you ever think God looks at us and be like, you're right. Why do you guys let that happen? Because I'm pretty sure that's what God thinks of us. Like, good question, Christians.